So
recording in progress.
That's it. We got it. Okay, we're holding on the 11th page of the copies, page Tes Vav, and we were speaking about the idea of the achdus that there's to be found in multiple kavim. Even though everything in the world is made in such a way of different kavim, of different lines, etc., etc., still in all, the fact that it's multiple kavim, the fact that it's multiple lines, shows that it is not a matter of unity. How's that going to fit in with Mashiach's times, when it's going to be revealed Hashem's unity, etc.? So essentially we explained that in the unity, in the different kavim, there's going to come down in the different lines of right and left, there's going to come down the unity and oneness of Hashem in those different lines. So this idea that in those different lines is going to come down the idea of the unity is expressed all across the board, the Rebbe says. You have this in the level of Torah mitzvahs you have mitzvahs aseh, mitzvahs lois aseh, you have that in the idea of tefillin versus mezuzah, Torah versus tefillah, one is the right, one is the left. We said hamayim lam chayma minam mismailam, and even in what the Rebbe was speaking about in a previous mimer, that in the nefsha bahamis there is a level of kriris and chamimus. There is the coldness to worldly to kedusha. That's a result of passion and heat in klippa, in worldly things. So when he has a chamimus, a heat, a passion in worldly things, so that manifests as well that he's cold, that he has a kriris to kedusha things. And the Rebbe explained that these two things also have the idea of achdus because they also are derived, or are going to be two lines of achdus. They're derived from kedusha, and this is what he's been talking about in the last chapter, or whatever, the last ayis, about where and in what way do we see kedusha in these things. So first of all, he brought in about the idea of Shimi ben Gera, that we find that Hashem, that David HaMelech said, don't hurt him because Hashem Amar Kalel, that Hashem gave him the chayas. The same thing in Klippa, the fact that Klippa has any chayas to do anything, that's all a result of whatever they are getting from Kedusha, and the chamimus of the passion, the heat of the nefesh habahamis in Klippa comes, the Maimer says, from the idea of heat and passion in Kedusha. And but the main focus that he's talking about is not that it's derived from the heat and passion in Kedusha, and that maybe we're going to learn about a little bit in the footnote, but just the other way around. The main focus is that in Kedusha, heat has a maila, even in Klippa, over ambivalence and coldness, because the nefesh habahamis of a shoyer nagoch, that's a very angry and always fighting, and Yiddish something bricket sich, he's the whole time kicking around, he's the whole time in an active way against kedusha. It's easier to talk with him. It's easier to convince him. He's passionate. There could be a give and take. There could be an engagement. Someone who is cold, someone who's like an aze, stubborn and cold, like a goat, that's kriris of klippa. That's much more difficult to deal with. By the way, that's also has to do with the end of our week's parsha, which is the idea of Amalek. We say Asher korcha baderech, that he made you cold. That is considered Reishis Goyim Amalek. Is the worst, and the beginning and the core aspect of Klippa is being cold and ambivalent. So that's where he says that when we're dealing with klippa, we're dealing with chamimus, we're dealing with heat, even though it's a heat and passion for klippa, there is a means and a way to transform it and to elevate it and to work with it. Now he's going to speak in a similar vein, that there is the level of the heat that we could work with, and that in a similar vein there's the coldness of nefesh habahamis also has its type of benefit as well. So we're holding again on page Tes Vav 11 in your printouts, line 23. So too, it's an idea of coldness in matters of holiness. The entire idea of coldness came into being. In other words, why did Hashem make such an idea of coldness? Just like why did Hashem make the idea of heat and passion? Because then it's possible to work with it, and from that you can have an additional chayis and avoida by thinking that the source of heat is really from kedusha. In a similar vein, why is it there the idea of coldness in klippim shekol inin hakridus nisava beglal shaloi maspik shetia avoida the midas bovad? The entire idea of coldness came about because insufficient that the avoida of the emotions is insufficient to have that avoida. In other words, emotions are passionate. Intellect is just the opposite. It's dispassionate, it's cold, it's quiet, it's relaxed, it's calm. True, in Avodas Hashem, the Alter Rebbe is out to teach in Tanya all about how to serve Hashem with our heart. And the whole Likutei Amorim is really an instruction manual about how to have a love and awe of Hashem. But even the love and awe of Hashem cannot exist in and of itself, cannot be there alone. You cannot have only emotions, but there also has to be the idea of intellect. That is the nature of coldness. And therefore, there has to be both lines of intellect and emotions. Emotions are represented by the heat of the nefesh habahamis. The intellect is represented by the coldness of nefesh habahamis. But a person thinks into it that what is its source and what is its purpose? Its purpose is to bring him to a state to realize that in kedusha he needs to have a heat and passion in kedusha, and in kedusha he has to not just have the emotional level of kedusha, but we are Chabad Chassidim, we're the whole time emphasizing this. It's not just enough to have Chagas, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, which is what other Chassidim are about, but it's also the idea of Chabad. We have to have the intellect itself. Again, another in intellect itself is going to bring about two lines, Ubeseichel Gufa, and in intellect itself, there has to be Chochma Bina, there has to be the level of Chochma Bina also represents the idea of hot and cold. Chassidus explains that Bina, which is also on the left side, when you divide the spheres into the two lines or the three lines, so Chochma is on the right, just like Chesed is on the right. Bina is on the left, just like Gevura is on the left. And just like Chesed and Gevura is like water and fire, again, it's the right line and the left line. Heat is Gevura, and water is calmness, that's coolness. So intellect and emotion also have that division. And in intellect itself, Chachma is cold and like water. Water tends to like join and cause things to be together. It brings things together, it makes things stick together. That's the idea of Chachma, that's only one Nekuda. Bina is about breaking things down, dividing it into parts, making it into details. That's the nature of fire. So you have again coldness of Chachma, the coolness of Chachma, and the heat of Bina. Also in the beginning of Tanya we have, in Perek Gimel, he speaks about it at the level of Ava Kiddush Beyesh. Its source is from the level of Bina, primarily in the first Perek, in the third Perek, he talks about but Ava Betanugim, which is also called Ava Kamayim, that's calm, it's not a flaming fire. That source is in the Chachma, because that is calm, that is like water, and so on. So we see the two lines of heat and coolness that's to be found in the Nefesh Bahamis is reflected also in Kedusha. The Rebbe has a footnote about this. What is the unity after all? But let's first finish this paragraph. Shadafka Oz, only then Nasis HaAvoida Betach Shleimus does the Avoida take place in the most perfect way. Let's turn back a page. Actually, let's turn back 2 pages. To page 9, Yud Gimel. And on the bottom of the page, the bottom of the text of the page, there's an asterisk. There's 2 asterisks, but the other one is with explanation. Let's just go to the asterisk, the first one. And the Rebbe addresses a question that people have about what just now we were talking about Achdus, and seemingly there was no real Achdus that we spoke about over here between the 2 levels of heat and cold. So the Rebbe says like this: in response to the question about that we asked at the beginning of the Maimer, we asked the question, how do we say that there's a level of that there's the chivun shekridas v'chamimis shem shnei kavim chafchim, since cold and heat are 2 opposite lines. Ubishneihem loy nirgish inyan haruchnis. Since we're talking about the heat and we're talking about the coldness of the Nefesh Bahamis is cold towards Kedusha and it's passionate about this world. And we asked, how is it possible to be felt in it, the idea of oneness and unity, if there is this type of, if there isn't the spirituality that unites them? In Kedusha, we could see how the spirituality will unite the disparate levels, the diverse levels. But in Klippa, how could there be a unity if there's no spiritual component to it? So the Rebbe explains the question more. The indication of the expression is that the question is, first of all, how is it possible to be Aleph, Inyan ha'achdus b'shnei ha'kavim ha'hofchim, the kriris v'chamimus? How could there be the unity in the 2 opposite lines of coldness and heat? Next page again, under the text, Shebeklipa Gufa. How can there be the joining and the unity of coldness and heat in Klippa? Klippa is not a place of unity. Beis, another component of the question that we had earlier in the Maimer, Inyan ha'achdus ben kriris v'chamimus the Klippa le'inyan ha'kedusha. How could there be a union and a joining between the coldness and the heat of Klippa to Kedusha? So we just now answered. There is a explanation because it comes from holiness. So the Rebbe says, "V'lechura seemingly habir sheshayrish inyan ha'chamimus v'akriris dil umazeu belakus." The explanation that the root of the heat and the cold of the opposite side is in godliness, that we just now explained. The heat of the Nefesh Bahamis is rooted in the fact that a person needs to have heat and passion and Kedusha. And the coldness of Nefesh Bahamis is rooted in the fact that a person needs to serve Hashem, not just with his emotions, which are passionate, but also with the intellect, which is cold, or not just with Bina, which is likened to fire, but also with Chachma, which is likened to cold. It's still Eina Metaretz Adayin Hakushi Benegel of Shoris Inyan Achdus B'Klippa Gufa. It doesn't answer yet the question concerning the possibility of the union in Klippa itself. All it answers is how Klippa can be joined with Kedusha. And that is when we reveal the true nature of Klippa. The true nature of Klippa is really coming from Kedusha, like Shimi ben Geda, it says, was speaking on Hashem's behalf, even though he was doing something bad and he was manifesting Klippa. The same thing, the coldness of Nefesh Habahamis, the heat of Nefesh Habahamis is really an expression of where coldness and heat has to be in Kedusha. But the first question is about in Klippa itself, where do we see it? Where do we see the unity? So the Rebbe writes, Kol hani kushis isnu. All of these questions are to be found. V'lav b'chol pam tzarech lemnoisam kulam. The Rebbe is first of all saying that in the Maimer, in the answer, I'm not going through every question. Even though every question is correct in its own sense, I don't have to explain the question in detail every time I mention it. And just like the question I don't have to explain every time, the same thing is Kain b'negeya lebiur. So too it's concerning the explanation. I don't have to explain it necessarily in every detail, because we can understand one detail or one aspect from the other on our own, the Rebbe is saying. In other words, the Rebbe was always encourage us, ten l'chacham v'yech kamoid, give a wise person and he will figure this out more by himself. So he says like this, through the explanation, how in one level there's possible to be the joining. In other words, how in Kedusha it's possible to be the joining. Moving, it's understood. In a similar vein, it's also in the rest. That in all the rest of the levels of Klippa, all the rest of the levels that result from it, including Klippa, can be a union also. Mitzrayim ervas haaretz ben cham. Mitzrayim, which is the most immoral part of the earth, was a child of Cham. Cham is also the numerical equivalent of 48. And hu me'arboim u'shmoina tzirufim achroinim d'shem Elokim. It's from the 48 latter or last or lower combinations of Shem Elokim. I think we've learned about this before in one of the previous Basel Aganim Amorim this year, that there is in Shem Elokim, since it's made up of 5 letters, Aleph, Lamed, Hey, Yud, Mem, so 5 letters can have 120 different combinations of those 5 letters. They can be set up Mem, Yud, Hey, Lamed, Aleph, Lamed, Aleph, Hey, Yud, Mem, Hey, Yud, Lamed, Aleph, Mem, whatever. There's 120 different types of levels. Now, 72 of them, the first 72, is associated with Chesed. Chesed is the numerical equivalent of Ayin Beis of 72. So it's not yet, even though Shem Elokim has to do with Gvura and severity, it's not yet the total level of constriction and severity. Which is the true source of Klippa and Mitzrayim? That's the final 48 combinations of Shem Elokim. They come from the Sfiras HaGvura. That's why it says that Cham was the father of Mitzrayim. The corresponding level of Klippa came from Cham Mem Ches, the 48 final combinations. So, what are we seeing from this? Like we mentioned also in the previous Maimer, Shem Elokim, even though it's a Gematria Teva, it's the numerical equivalent of the word the nature, but the Shem Elokim itself is a process in Kedusha. So he's saying that the Shorshoy, the source of these 48 levels, in Shem Elokim, Tzimtzum Harishon, that's the first Tzimtzum, is the source of this constriction of Shem Elokim, especially the final 48 combinations. Loi Moti, it comes from the level of it doesn't reach. We mentioned that just like there's Rotzi v'Shuv, there's Moti v'Loi Moti. Moti v'Loi Moti comes from above to below, it comes down, and then it like doesn't reach. It comes down, doesn't reach. It's like a give and take. Again, it's a binary system, on, off, on, off. That is the Tzimtzum Harishon, and that Loi Moti is an expression of Hayecholos Shaloi Lahoyer, the capability not to shine, which means as follows. The source of the Klippa is in Shem Elokim, and it's specifically in the Memches Tziruf Machronim in the final 48. And that Shem Elokim itself is something that comes from the Tzimtzum Harishon, which that comes from the level of Moti v'Loi Moti, that Hashem can come down and not come down, and shine and not shine. Now, Chassidus explains this capability of Hashem to shine and not shine, that's neither shining nor not shining. When you're dealing with Meir and not Meir, Tzimtzum versus Gilui, Mamalakol Makmachol, or the constriction that he removed, it's seemingly separate things. But in the original source, it comes from Hashem's essential capability to illuminate and not illuminate. And that essential capability to illuminate and to not illuminate, that is a state of oneness. Therefore, the Rebbe is saying, since there's a state of oneness in that original source, so once you tell us that Klippa has the source for its heat and its coldness are all in Kedusha, so then you know to build it up further and further and further till you get to the original source of unity, and from that it's understood that unity will trickle down to all the other levels below. Let's finish the mimer. Let's go on to the 11th page of your printout, is Vav, bottom of the page. Going back to what we spoke about at the beginning of the mimer, that it says that the waters, why the Yidden were protected by the waters, because they had the right and the left. That's what it says. The waters were for them a wall on the right and on their left. That it says the waters really came filled with anger, chayma, from the word chayma, which is anger. And what protected them? The right and the left, which is either the level of Torah from the right, or Tefillah, which is from the left, or the idea of mezuzah, which is on the right, and Tefillin, which is on the left hand. And in general, it's going on Torah mitzvahs. The koyal close avoida bisman has. It's going on the general avoida these days. B'shnei kavim, the yamin u'smoil, and the two lines of the right and left. Torah u'tefillah. V'chein tefillin u'mezuzah. Top of the last page, kaniska le'el, like was mentioned previously. That is the preparation for the revelation of the future time. When Mashiach comes, that also Mashiach comes, we said there's going to be both lines. Both of them will be on the right. Because Mashiach comes, will be fulfilled what was foretold, that the spirit of Tumah will remove from the land. Like it says, because they will not do evil and they do not destroy in my entire holy mountain, because the earth was filled with the knowledge of Hashem, like the waters covered the sea. What does that mean? Even by animals, the bad will cease. Why? Because there won't be any left anymore. There will be only the right. There won't be the spirit of Tumah. Like it says, it says, also his enemies, when Mashiach comes, will make peace with him. So the Chazal say, what's it referring to? Which enemies will make peace with man? Zehanachash. That's the serpent, which goes back to the original serpent, the Klippa, Satan, etc., Yetzirah, that it'll cease from the snake, the serpent, the existence of being an enemy. He's galabay mitzius yamit, will become revealed in the serpent his true existence. K'maishu b'shar shalamayla, like it is in its root above. Kaniskal el sifhei, like it's explained earlier in the 5th chapter, the mashal of the sinning woman that the king pays to be able to convince his son to do something wrong, but really she doesn't even want that he should do anything wrong. It should be fulfilled what it says at the end of the Shira, that Hashem will reign forever. Afterwards, in davening, when we recite it right before Yishtabach, we don't just recite it the way it is non Yashir, as Yashir, that Hashem will reign forever, but also we say it in the language of Targum. We say it, Havaya Malchus Koyim Cholu, that Hashem, His kingdom, will stand and remain. What does this mean? What is it? Why do we translate it? Why do we put it in Lashon Targum? That the drawing down the world is very much below. That it comes down into other languages. When we conclude, and that the saviors will go up, meaning Mashiach will go up on the mountain of Tzion to judge the mountain of Esav, and Hashem will have the rain, but Mashiach Tzidkenu, Mamish, in the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu. So the Rebbe, there's in the explanation on the side, he says a very interesting thing. He says, in general, the letters of the Torah are called stones. And stones are a very interesting feature. Stones are something that are made by Hashem. People don't create stones. On the other hand, there's other building blocks, and that is the level of bricks. Bricks is human beings. So stones are the levels of letters and words that come from Lashon HaKodesh, because the holy tongue comes from Hashem, just like the stones are created by Hashem. Bricks indicate the language and the letters of languages of all the 70 different languages of people. And Yidden are scattered, Alter Rebbe says, in many different countries, amongst the 70 archetypal nations, and they also use the non-Jewish languages, and in all types of things that they need to have, dealing with business. So the Rebbe says, the Alter Rebbe says over there in the Maimer, afterwards, when a person davens, once he used language, the Goyish languages, and they daven with self-sacrifice, and they daven with intention, and they learned Torah, Lishma, after being involved in the toil and doing work and business. So then they elevate all the different combinations of letters of the non-Jewish languages to very high above, to the source of their neshama. And this is what the Chazal called the Lashon Chulin Shenas al Taras HaKodesh, the mundane that's made on the purity of holiness, meaning that it is mundane languages, but now becomes through the davening, through the learning, so now they become elevated, and it's just like bricks that a person puts together down here. That's all bricks is really made of simple earth, but through a person he could make the bricks into something good and turn it into as hard as a stone, that you could build a wall from it. And walls has to do with Torah as well. Vani chayma zu Torah.